Hey, seventh graders. So this is lesson 80. We're going to be analyzing the historical fiction characters in the book that you chose. And by analyzing them, what I mean is we're going to look at how the author portrays realistically and believably a made-up character in your book. Some of you may be reading a book that's a memoir or based on a true story. So what we want to find out is, how did your author portray the characters in your book to make them actually feel like they lived and breathed and belonged in the time period that you selected. So I'm going to be using the book Milkweed, the read aloud that I've been doing, and we'll be talking about Misha Pilsudski and Yuri and a couple of the other characters to determine, well, how well did the author explore their roots living in 1939 in Warsaw, Poland. So let's take a look. All right, for this lesson on analyzing the historical characters, the first thing you're going to find in this lesson is a real brief chapter summary. So whether you've read one chapter or 5 chapters, what I want you to think about is, what have you read so far? And I'm going to summarize chapters 10 through 14 of Milkweed. It's kind of where we left off in class. And I'm sort of using the summarizing structure, someone wanted something but so. So I'm using that in a rough form just because I want to keep it simple. I don't want to overtell. So here's my summary. Misha wanted to know about angels, but Yuri doesn't believe as conditions get worse in Warsaw. Food and coal are becoming scarce, so Misha has to work harder to survive. He finds out a Nazi soldier has moved into Janina's house and is probably taking the food that he leaves for her. Pretty simple. I don't want to get into every single detail, but these are the big ideas that I think are important for chapters 10 through 13. So here's where we're going. The second page is where we're going to analyze each of the characters that you think are important to your piece of historical fiction. So first thing I've done is I've labeled what I consider to be the 3 most important characters: Stop Thief, now known as Misha, Yuri, and Janina. So right here in the middle, you'll see there's a category: fictional, based on a real person, or a real person. So what I'm asking you to do there is think about, all right, is Misha a fictional, totally made up character? Do you think he's based on a real person? For example, in A Christmas Memory, Buddy was loosely based on the author Truman Capote. There was a lot of changes made to make it a holiday story, but Buddy was based on Truman Capote. In some books, like if you're reading The Diary of Anne Frank was a real person living in the time, and she is real, and what you know is actual history. And then the other part that you're going to think about is, once you've decided whether your character is fictional, based on a real person, or a real person, please explain how you think you know this. So I'll model that with these 3 characters. So the first character, Misha, I believe he's fictional. And the reason I think I know that is because in the beginning he has no name. He goes by the nickname Stop Thief. He's a small boy. The identity that he has, Misha Pilsudski, is actually given to him by Yuri. This is a character who doesn't know his past. He doesn't know where he comes from. He doesn't know anything about his history. So it's likely that in any kind of research, we would never find a Misha Pilsudski, especially since that's the name Yuri gave to him. My next character, Yuri, I also believe is fictional, and I believe he's fictional because, like Misha, really doesn't have much of a history. We don't know his last name. We don't know anything about his history, where he came from, why he's an orphan. We don't know anything about any family that he may have had at one time. All we know is he's an orphan, and he is just trying to survive the best that he can in Warsaw. My last character, Janina, I also believe she is fictional. She does have a last name in this book. She does have a family. We don't know a whole lot about their history, their background. When we get deeper into the book, we'll spend more time with Janina and her family living in the ghetto. But because Janina isn't a real main character like Misha or Yuri, and she's not the narrator, I think it's pretty safe to assume that she is another character that was made up by the author. So in the book Milkweed, so far, the majority of the characters I do believe are made up. They are fictional. However, they are living in the real time, in the real place of the 1939 Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, Poland. The last part of this analysis, we're going to be looking at characters and thinking about points of view. And by points of view, I mean who is speaking, who's telling the story, because the story will change depending on whose voice that we hear. So first we're going to go through the different types of narrators or points of view that you often find in fiction writing. So the first one is called first-person narrator, or first-person point of view. This is where the main character tells the story. The narrator uses personal pronouns like I, me, we, or us. Here's an example of what this sounds like from Milkweed, because we do know in Milkweed that Misha is the narrator. And here's just the very first page. I am running. That's the first thing I remember, running. I carry something, my arm curled around it, hugging it to my chest. Bread, of course. Someone is chasing me. Stop, thief. I run. People, shoulders, shoes. Stop, thief. The next point of view or narrator would be called third person. And in this particular instance, we have a character, not the main character, who's telling the story of the main character. And one of the most famous versions of this would be The Great Gatsby. And in this particular novel, a character by the name of Nick is telling the story of The Great Gatsby. So I'm going to read to you what it sounds like, because the narrator does use I and he, but the narrator is not the main character. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and at a sort of moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I have an unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there was something gorgeous about him, something heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. So here, Nick is telling the story of The Great Gatsby. He's not the main character, Gatsby is, but he's telling us what he sees through the course of the story. The third type of narrator or point of view is called omniscient. It's also third person. And this is where we have a narrator that is not a character in the story telling us what he or she sees. It's an all-knowing, all-seeing narrator. And there is no use of the personal pronoun I. It is strictly someone who is not part of the story telling the story of the character and his or her actions. So I'm going to read to you a quick clip from Holes, and you'll hear what an omniscient third-person point of view narrator sounds like. The reader is probably asking, why would anyone go to Camp Green Lake? Most campers weren't given a choice. Camp Green Lake is a camp for bad boys. If you take a bad boy and make him dig a hole every day in the hot sun, it will turn him into a good boy. That was what some people thought. Stanley Yelnats was given a choice. The judge said, you may go to jail or you may go to Camp Green Lake. Stanley was from a poor family. He had never been to camp before. So here we have the narrator calling Stanley by name. Stanley, what Yelnats, was not a rich kid. He was not given a choice. So that is the omniscient narrator, also part of the third person point of view. And the last one, letter D, called second person point of view. It's not common. It's where you, the reader, are telling the story. I want you to think about choose your own adventure books. You need to go down that dark and scary hallway, and then you turn on the light, but it doesn't come on. You go down the dark steps. So I'm going to read to you again a real quick passage of a clip that is written in second person point of view. And this is by Henry David Thoreau. If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them. So you, the narrator, the reader, are the one who is doing the action in a second person point of view. So for this activity, what I want you again to think about is you're going to be analyzing, going back and looking for evidence. So the first thing we're going to look at is who is the narrator of your book. And because I am reading Milkweed still, I'm going to put that there just for a reminder. It is first person. The main character, Misha, is telling the story. How do I know? Give a specific example from the text to prove it. So I'm just going to use a citation of what proof I have, and it's the very first paragraph in chapter 1, and I'm going to use it in quotations. I am running. So right now we know that whoever is speaking is the narrator, and it's the main character. That's the first thing I remember. And I'll stop there. So the rest of the paragraph continues being told through the voice of the main character. And how do I know that it's the main character? Because it uses I. And that's usually that signal word that tells you that the narrator is first person point of view. The next two questions are really going to force you to make an inference. And by inference is something that you figured out without the author telling you. So the first question is, how does this type of narrator affect what you learn about the main character and the story? So thinking that Misha is the storyteller of Milkweed, how does this affect what I learn about the main character in the story? Well, I know that this little boy, this orphan who doesn't have a past that he remembers, has no history, everything that I learn in the story comes through Misha's eyes. I learn everything that he sees, everything that he feels, everything that he does. This whole story is told through his experiences and what he observes of the world around him. So this last question, how might the story be different with a different type of narrator? So what I decided to do, I edited the original first-person point of view into that omniscient third-person narrator. So instead of saying, I am running, let's try it this way. Misha was running. That's the first thing he remembered. So how would that be different? Well, if a narrator is watching the entire scene of this book play out, an omniscient narrator can tell you what everybody's doing. The thing that they can't do, if you are an omniscient narrator, is really give you a good, clear idea of how the characters feel or what they think about. It's less common to get into the heart and the head of characters if a third-person omniscient narrator is telling. So I think what would be lost if we change the narrator to a omniscient third-person point of view is, what's Misha going through? We can watch him go through things. We can watch the other characters go through things through the eyes of a narrator, but we will lose what they feel and what they think. And that's why it's important to really understand how your author chooses to narrate your story. So 7th graders, your task now is to go into Google Classroom and open up Lesson 80. You're going to be opening the historical fiction journal number 2, and you're going to be going through following the same steps that I did. So you're really going to be thinking critically about the characters. Who are they? Are they real? How do you know they're real? Are they fictional? How do you know? Why do you believe they are? And then who's telling the story? And does it matter? Does it matter if the main character is telling his or her own story? Or is it just as well that a narrator tells it? So I really want you to analyze not only who these characters are, but also who's telling the story and what happens to the story because of who's telling it.